Hello, welcome to episode 208 of the Herpetological Highlights podcast. My name's Tom Major. Co-hosting with me, as per usual, is Ben Marshall.
Hey.
And for our 208th instalment, we're going to be talking about lizards. We're going to be talking about lizards and fire. So, some new research about lizards and how they react to the threat of fire, which is, quite obviously a dangerous thing.
Pretty much universally dangerous to any animal, I think. I'm not sure if there are any creatures that thrive in fire.
No, not really. Some of them are better adapted to post-fire situations,
For sure.
Post-burn set up.
And there's those firehawks that purposefully spread the fire.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So, what would you do, Ben, if you were faced with a fire?
Leave.
Leave. Yeah, good strategy. Me too. And how might you detect that there's a fire if there were a fire?
Heat, light, and the stench of burning objects.
Stench of burning objects. Yeah, so that kind of leads us into this study. So I'll introduce it. It's by Álvarez-Ruiz Belliure J, 2021. This was published. Fire-driven behavioural response to smoke in a Mediterranean lizard, published in Behavioural Ecology. So we're talking about a medium-sized but quite long-tailed lizard here, Samodromus algirus, known by quite a weird common name actually, which is the Algerian Samodromus. So a weird case where the scientific name and the common name are almost the same. And this is a species found in the Western Mediterranean and Northern Africa. But we're talking about Spanish ones. So we're travelling to Spain for this episode, Ben. Wildfires can be quite common in Spain, but in other parts of Spain, they're more rare. It really depends where you are in Spain. What it tends to be is that some areas which are sort of more inland, more prone to burning, the layout of the land can have an impact on this. So can the types of vegetation that are found. So if you've got quite scrubby vegetation, it's quite dense, the odd tree, that can lend itself to burning. So these areas, these sort of scrubby vegetated areas will burn, whereas nearer the coast, it's not so much under threat of burning. You've got more sparse vegetation. It's sandier, sand and fire. Sand can put out a fire, so it's not so good for burning. And so the lizards that live on the coastal areas tend to have less of a threat from burning than those that live inland in the sort of scrubby areas.
An easy coastal sandy life.
Exactly, without a threat of a fire. And so the kind of study here was to see if these lizards, these ones which have led a sort of cherished life on the coast without any threat of fire, behave differently in the threat of fire than those lizards which live inland and maybe have a little bit more likelihood of encountering a fire.
Right.
So we have to try and get...
There's a very big advantage to handling fire properly, right? You mess that up, you're either going to get burnt or burnt.
Yes, burnt literally and figuratively if you don't react to fire. So what do they do when there is a fire is kind of the question. Logically, you'd think they would try and avoid the fire, but how do we know there's a fire? Smoke tends to be the best way, so that was what the authors here did.
Hence the saying.
No smoke without fire, yep. And they piped smoke into the lizards in a sort of captive terrarium setup. So they put them in some glass enclosures, and then they piped smoke to the lizards, and they were looking to see how they react to this smoke and whether the ones from inland areas where it's more fire prone react differently to ones which are in the sort of coastal areas where they're less likely to encounter a fire.
Important point of comparison though, they did have they've got two smoke piping scenarios. One that's acting as a control, which is a odorless smoke, essentially.
A vapor.
Yes.
A vapor, which kind of looks a bit smoky, but it's
doesn't smell smoky. And then legit, I think they burnt some pine needles or something, wasn't it? For their real smoke. So that's giving you the ability to separate the lizards reacting to a visual cue from a smell or scent cue there.
Right.
Because the vapor has no smoky smell to it.
Vapor has no scent. And so, they were looking to see, and they were basically looking to see what the lizards did when they experienced this smoke, or fake smoke, as the case may be. And in populations from fire-prone habitats, these sort of inland populations, the lizards reacted more aggressively to smoke, and it was quicker as well. So if they are from areas where there is lots of fire, they reacted more intensely, and that reaction tended to be scrabbling along at the side of the glass, trying to get away from the fire. All the lizards were trying to get away from the fire, but ones from fire-prone ecosystems had this markedly more dramatic reaction to fire, almost as if they recognized it as a very real threat that some of them had actually
they
even
recognized
experienced.
it earlier too. It's this sort of like immediate get up and go, and the going is more intense. Yeah.
And some of the lizards in this study had actually probably experienced real fires. So for them, there's probably a little bit of something in their previous history, maybe a little bit of trauma from actually experiencing a real fire. Others, they've lived a life of luxury. They didn't have that sort of history. But yeah, these lizards don't live very long. They only live sort of 2 or 3 years. So it's unlikely that all the lizards had the opportunity to really experience fire.
Right.
So it's probably contained within their genes, this reaction to fire being a little bit more aggressive, which makes sense. You'd think that there would be a sort of evolutionary pressure to try and react more intensely to fire if fire was more common where you lived. But unbelievably, this is actually the first ever evidence of smoke detection by reptiles in wild populations of animals. And yeah, they sort of provide this evidence that fire acts as a driver, shaping their evolution. If they live in areas with more fire, they react more aggressively to fire. So it's shaping both lizard behavior and probably maybe even we don't know this, but they may have a more sensitive sense of smell or something along those lines as a way of
you don't know how it's impacting the lizards. It could be a smell thing, could be a reaction thing. So that behavioral aspect that you're mentioning. Could be more irritated by smoke or something along those lines. There's all sorts of different mechanics that could be sort of levied to protect themselves from the fire. I don't know. That's going to take some digging. That's going to take some pretty serious genetics work. I would suspect to unpack that.
Yeah, it does seem crazy to me that this is the first time anyone's ever actually tested to see if reptiles react to smoke.
And I think
I remember
you need to separate whether they directly experienced fire too. Like I know they've sort of suggested that a lot of the individuals probably haven't because of their lifespan and how frequent the fires are. But to really hammer that question out, you'd want to know the experience of the lizard up until that point, wouldn't you?
Yeah, and there is quite a lot of records of reptiles and other animals can survive wildfires.
Yeah,
not always. I think it depends on the severity of the fire, but a lot of these habitats which kind of burn, not necessarily every year, but if they burn repeatedly, then there tends to be good methods for the animals that live there not to all just go up in smoke. So they usually find a burrow or go under a rock and sort of weather the fire blowing over. We had a white-lipped pit viper in Thailand that we were radio tracking, and then a forest fire came past, and the snake just went inside a little fallen down tree. It was quite a big, thick fallen down log, basically. Huge tree that had come down. The snake just went deep inside that log. The fire blew over. The fire wasn't hot enough to ignite the actual dead log on the floor. I think it's probably quite damp. And yeah, about couple of hours after the fire went past, the snake was out basking again, totally fine. So
I imagine that, and sort of a lot of different animal burrows superb for dodging the flames. Big old termite mound, something like that.
Oh wow, yeah, termite mound probably be a lovely place to start. So
air conditioned
lizards,
and all.
Air conditioned, plenty of termites around, probably not ideal, but the this is a lizard, this species of lizard which is known colloquially as the Algerian Samodromus, is making a reaction to fire and also probably surviving forest fires. Shall we move on to our very much more wet species of the bye week?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so we've got a paper here by Marinho, Santos, Faivovich, Lyra and Giaretta, Haddad, Carvalho. 2024, a new species of the Aplastodiscus albosignatus group from the northern Mantiqueira mountain range, published in Herpetologica. So, what a frog this is. What a frog this is. Just a reliable, good green frog, this one, don't you think? Just ticking the frog boxes, I would say.
They've got big sort of Kermit the Frog energy. That very rich, almost lime green, but just if you were to think of red-eyed tree frogs with that very high contrast green to red, that's not dissimilar from what we've got here with the very clean green, very rich red eyes. Very default frog shape too. When I think
Very
frog,
default,
I think a frog shaped like this.
It really is just like a Route 1 frog, really. Like if you asked I would imagine if you asked a child to draw a frog, this is kind of the frog that you'd get.
Yeah.
That's not to say it's not cool. They're really
it's
pretty
just
nice
condensed
looking.
frog. It's brilliant.
Yeah, and so we got this frog. So this frog was described, well, just a few weeks ago, and this one found during fieldwork in the northern sector of the Mantiqueira mountain range in the Brazilian Atlantic forest. So lovely forest. And they recorded specimens and some calls of this species, but they weren't sure what actual species it was. They knew that it was something in this genus Aplastodiscus, which is a crazy name for a genus, but they weren't sure which one. And these are known as flute frogs. And apparently that's because they sound like flutes when they sing. And yeah, this new species here, this big green frog, is it big?
Is it big?
Is it actually big? It looks big.
I've got it.
It looks like it's the size of a hand.
I don't think it's monstrous.
No,
Usually
not
newly
too big.
described frogs. It's about 4 centimeters SVL.
Oh, it's
not massive.
Big. Small.
It's actually, but it's larger than most of the species of the bite we cover that are like 1 centimeter, 2 centimeter frogs.
Yeah, I guess undescribed species are less likely to be big giant things, but nevertheless, it's quite a small frog. But they've called it Aplastodiscus olophonus. And that's a cool name because olophonus is the combination of 2 Greek words. Olos, which is an ancient Greek wind musical instrument that resembles a flute, and phono, which means voice, so it means flute voiced. So the idea is that this is a flute frog with a flute voice, and really beautiful name.
Do we have a sound?
We have a sound. This is the sound of this flute frog. You ready for this, Ben?
I'm super ready. This is the frog playing the flutes, is it?
That's actually the sound of a real flute. Just to sort of put you in mind of this frog call, because unfortunately we couldn't find a frog call. It was only printed as a sound wave. I couldn't get it anywhere. However, because I realised that would leave you deeply unsatiated and clamouring for a frog call in the flute frog group, I did find the call of a closely related species.
That's more
so
like
this is
it.
another one. This is the Hylinae tree frog, which is Aplastodiscus leucopygius, and I think as you heard a real flute there, and you'll agree, this call is virtually indistinguishable.
It's a little more monotone, but I can see where the name comes from.
Yeah, you can see where the name comes from.
It's not dissimilar. It's just
no. But there you go. So that's a closely related species, but not the same species, because unfortunately you couldn't find it. But yeah, this nice green frog that they've called Aplastodiscus olophonus doesn't have a common name. I guess maybe it would be called something along the lines of the Mantiqueira mountain
flute
frog, perhaps. Don't know. Didn't come with one, so we could probably just call it the green flute frog, really. But I don't know.
Green flute frog would be great. Green, red-eyed flute frog.
Yeah. So maybe that's a good name for it.
Assuming that the others are named something like that.
Yes, that's it's a worthwhile point. Right. So that is our new species of frog, and have we got any other business for this week, Ben?
Any
business?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, well, I had a couple of bits. First of all, I just wanted to give a shout out to Scott Iper and Ty Iper because they've started a new podcast. They've been long-time fans of our podcast, and obviously they are authors of herpetological books. I know they've got a new one out. But yeah, they've got a new podcast called Cold Blooded Contributions. And yeah, I gave a couple of episodes a listen. It's good stuff. It's kind of a mixture between herpetoculture and herpetology. There's like guests from either side of that sort of spectrum. So yeah, I've just, if anyone wants to go check that out, that would be worthwhile doing. And we also had a question. We had a question about tuataras, actually. So question from Bentley. Bentley had listened to the Dart Frogs episode where we were talking about them toe tapping. And Bentley said, I imagined, yeah, remember that? He said, I imagined dart frogs tapping their toes and coordinating a hunt like raptors from Jurassic Park after reading the title of your newest podcast about dart frog toe tapping, which I thought was very funny because they did have like an element of social stuff in that paper, didn't they? Like they tapped a bit more in the presence of their like mates.
Yes.
Toe tapping.
Right. Yes, there was an aspect of that, wasn't it? Like it. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it would be interesting to see if there is some like a coordinated toe tapping hunt, not beyond the realms of possibility, Bentley. But then Bentley asked the question: do you think the tuatara should be classified as a lizard? So tuataras. No, Bentley is the answer to that question, in my opinion. So tuataras are actually members of this really ancient lineage called Rhynchocephalia, which separated from snakes and lizards 250 million years ago. So all of their other close relatives are extinct, and they dominated the kind of medium reptile niche in the Jurassic period. So in the Jurassic period, there were loads of Rhynchocephalians knocking about, but subsequently they've all gone extinct, except for the tuatara, which is kind of this really, really old, ancient reptile endemic to New Zealand.
Well,
and they're just super cool.
It itself isn't as ancient, right? It's as evolved as anything else. I'm going to be pedantic about it.
Yeah, you do like to be pedantic on this point. Yeah,
because those little tuataras have been out there evolving and keeping up just like everybody else. They happened to hit on a suite of traits that didn't need all that much adjustment.
No, yes, Ben, you're right. The tuataras themselves are modern reptiles, but they are descendants of a very ancient lineage that was around in the Jurassic period, and they are sole survivors of that lineage. So I still think they qualify as ancient, kind of. They're from an ancient lineage. Is that allowed? Is that enough? I think that's all right.
I don't know. It doesn't sound like it should be. It's like anything alive now has a lineage back then as well. It just happens to share it with more sort of brothers and sisters.
Yeah, okay. But I mean, it's still cool that they're the only Rhynchocephalians left.
Yes, well, they're very unique genetically, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Like the those weird purple frogs.
Yeah, no, yeah, we'll agree on that. But yeah, thanks for the email, Bentley. That is a good question. And yeah, although they do look a lot like lizards, they are in fact not lizards. They are tuataras. So yeah, I don't think I've got anything else actually, other business wise, unless you have, Ben.
I don't. No, that's good.
All right, cool. So I think really all that remains to be said is if you want to get in touch with us, you can. herphighlights@gmail.com. Thanks as always to our Patreons on patreon.com/herphighlights. Yeah, find us on Instagram at herp_highlights, and you can follow me on Instagram at Tom_E_major. And I think, yeah, there's not really much else to be said except from thank you for listening.
Yeah, thanks for listening.